Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Louis Frumkes, and before I introduce you to Ann Patchett and Patrick Ryan, I want to remind you that in May, our speaker will be the great Ethiopian author, Maza Mengistu, whose novel, The Shadow King, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I'd also like to thank the Simons Foundation and Joyce and Eugene Eichenberg for their enormous contributions to the center and enables us to do what we do, and all the rest of our very generous donors. And now, Ann. Ann Patchett is the author of 8 novels, 3 books of nonfiction, and 2 children's books, and is widely considered one of America's finest writers. She has been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Pulitzer Prize, and has won numerous prizes for women's fiction. Time magazine has called her one of the 100 most influential women in the world, and her books have been translated into 30 languages. Ann is also co-owner of Parnassus Books in Nashville, Tennessee. Tonight, she and her friend Patrick Ryan, who is both an editor and a writer, and to whom Ann has dedicated her latest novel, The Dutch House, will discuss how the pandemic has changed their reading, writing, and creative life. Q&A, so please submit some questions while they are speaking. You can submit them into the little box at the bottom of the screen. And afterwards, Claudette, my assistant, will take them and pose them to Ann and Patrick. That said, Ann, it's yours.
Thanks, Louis. Thanks for having me, Patrick. Thanks for being here with me.
Can you hear me?
You make everything easier. I can hear you. Are we good?
Yes.
There we are. Hi. Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody out in Zoom land. I'm normally in Nashville, but right now I am in Los Angeles, where the walls are blue and the sunlight is flattering.
I know we've got the blue going on with our double backgrounds here.
Yeah, and in New York City, so we're glamorously bi-coastal.
And there are a few people who've been hanging out in front of my building this afternoon who've been hollering various things. So if you hear something,
are they waiting, hollering in hopes that they will get into this Zoom event?
I gave them the link. I don't know what I was thinking, but I gave them the link. I just want to point out to everybody who's joined us here. I want to say thanks to Louis and Claudette, and thank you to Hunter and everybody who helped put us here together. Which is a special treat to be in the same place this day and age. And Ann and I have been friends for 20 years, and we met at an artist residency in Italy. And I've always likened it in my head. We were in a villa and with a whole bunch of people, and it was kind of like being in an Agatha Christie novel, except that it lacked the body in the garden. And we were the only 2 people there.
If we had stayed just a little while longer,
there would have been a body. You're right. And it might have been one of us.
It might have been
also
ours.
the only 2 people there who didn't speak any Italian. So we were very bonded by the end of the month that we spent there.
Yes, and it also, I would like to say that it was the last glamorous thing. It was both the first and the last glamorous thing that either one of us did. I just don't want people to think that we hang out in villas in Italy. It happened once, and that was it.
And it was 20 years ago.
And it was 20 years ago when you still could do things like that.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question that I forgot to ask you the last time that we spoke in a venue such as this, which is about the Dutch House. I have a few questions about the Dutch House. You mentioned to me in passing in a conversation once that you've gotten some very interesting reactions that you didn't quite expect from readers, from people who read the book and then said, this is what this meant to me, or this is what I got from it. And you said to me before we spoke last time, I really want you to ask me that. And then I completely forgot to ask you. So I'm asking you now.
So we're opening with that one.
Those?
That's
Yeah, we're
good.
going to open with that. That way I won't forget.
You know, people always ask, this is like the old English student, and by English student, I mean ninth grade, junior high school English student. Is it true that writers insert themes that then students who are forced to read the books are forced to dig out? And I think that for the most part, we don't embed themes. You know, it's not like a treasure hunt. And there's something that if you're really clever and paying attention, that you'll find. And often themes are pointed out to me after the book is published. And one of the things that I kept hearing from people when The Dutch House came out was that it helped them let go of their own old angers and hurts, and that they realized that they had been carrying around just grudges and sadnesses and ways in which misdeeds were done to them, and that they sort of gnawed on them like a bone, and that when they read the book, they could see that that actually wasn't a beneficial strategy for living a happy life. And my favorite example of this was, I was in the bookstore, I was in Parnassus Books one day, and these two women who were probably in their early 30s came up to me and said that they were sisters, and they had, neither one of them lived in Nashville, but they had taken this trip, like made a pilgrimage to come to Nashville because they wanted to go to the bookstore and hopefully meet me, which is always so strange because I'm like, what are the chances that I was going to be here when you happen to walk in the store? But they said that they had been estranged, they'd never gotten along, and they hadn't spoken for the last 5 years, and that one of them had been the favorite and the other one had not been the favorite, and they both had a lot of resentment towards the other growing up until they finally just stopped speaking, and that they had both read The Dutch House independently of one another and reached out to each other and said, let's just lay it down. And I never would have thought that that's where this book would have taken anyone. It wasn't the secret coded message that I was putting into the story, but I was so moved by that, and by, you know, similar things. That was certainly the most dramatic one. But I thought, okay, if I have written a book in which I inadvertently encourage people to lay down their old bitter grudges, then I've done some good in this world, and I can now retire and become a movie star or whatever it is that I wanted to do with my life, actually.
That's a great story. I'm so glad I asked. You've never told me that. And
I've been
you got to
saving
be careful, because now I'm going to follow up with a question about your acting ambitions. If we run dry.
It's just that I'm in LA and
Yeah.
the light is so good, and I'm thinking I really could have been somebody. Yeah.
There's still time for you to be somebody.
There,
And
there is no time. There's no time. Career. Thank you.
Couple of rapid fire questions about the Dutch House.
Okay.
The point of view, can you just tell us what led you to want to write this book? It's from the perspective of a male character, and it's in first person. So what led you to decide to do that?
Because when I wrote my novel Commonwealth, it was very autobiographical. And I had always said that I would never write an autobiographical novel. And I loved writing that novel. That novel was just like pure joy to me. And I thought, okay, what else have I told myself that I wouldn't do as a writer? Maybe I should do that, because writing an autobiographical novel went really well. And I thought, I have long said that I would never write a novel in first person. My first 2 books were in first person, and I was always working to master third person. And so once I finally got that, I thought, I'm never going back. It really felt like first person for me, not, I don't feel this way about other people's first person novels. It felt like a step towards third person. And so I decided that I should write a first person novel, because I always said I wasn't going to do that again. And I did really love it. And the fact that it was in Danny's point of view, and Danny was a man, that was not a problem, because Danny was a certain kind of smart, funny, charming, incredibly privileged and entitled man who I have known my whole life. I've known every permutation of this guy. So it was no trouble to tap into that. Okay, this is the lightning round, so I need to give shorter answers. Okay, I'm ready.
It's a very short lightning round though. Okay, the cover. I heard Chip Kidd say something really interesting once, that when he approaches a cover, he likes to not approach it literally. When he looks at the title, you know, if the title is the shrub, he's not gonna, yeah, he's gonna make a cover that's got a shrub on it. It's gonna be a cover that's something completely different. And one of the earliest things you told me was that after you were finishing up this novel is that you knew you didn't want a house on the cover.
Yeah.
So how did we end up with the cover that we have?
I'm going to tell you just a little dog leg of a story that's going to make me look crazy connected, which is Richard Powers has a book coming out in September called Bewilderment. And he sent me 2 mock-ups of the cover. And he said, you know, what do you think? Which one of these do you like better? And which one, you know, what do you think about them in general? And I said, I actually had a real problem with them, because the word bewilderment, which is a really long word to put on the cover of a book, the typeface looked bewildered. If you can imagine, I mean, it's like all the letters seemed to be trembling and cowering. They were sort of mushy on the edges and close together. And his name, Richard Powers, was very block and strong. And I said to him, if you're going to have the word bewilderment on the cover of a book, the typeface can't look bewildered. The typeface should look like Richard Powers. Like, you could swap it. You could have Richard Powers in a typeface that looked bewildered because his last name is Powers. That would be fine. But you can't have the word bewilderment unless it's in really strong type. So that kind of goes to what you're saying. Chip's point is, yeah, it was very important to me that anybody who read The Dutch House imagined the house that they saw in their mind, the best house they ever visited or lived in or drove past, the house of their dreams, not the house of mine. So even though there are details about the Dutch house, they're really like 6 or 8 details, and I just hit them over and over and over again. So there's a lot of room for the reader's imagination. And I wanted the cover to be a portrait of Maeve, and Maeve is the main character of the book. There actually is a portrait of her in the book. So at some point you're reading along and you're like, wait a minute, that's not just Maeve, that's actually the portrait her parents had painted of her. And I have a friend in Nashville who's a fabulous painter named Noah Satterstrom. And I asked Noah if he would paint Maeve for me. And he had 3 tiny children. He still has them. They're a little bit bigger. And I said, just read these 2 pages. And he did, and he painted that painting in 4 days. And it was magic. It is magic. And the nicest thing about that story is he's become a really close friend of mine. So that's been lovely.
That's fantastic. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting.
It is.
And it's much bigger.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's more of it than is actually on the cover.
He said, how big should I paint it? And I said, well, you know, like novel size, like 8 by 10 or, you know, 9 by 12 or what. And he was like, no, that's not how it works. I thought that is how it would work. Like he would just paint a little bitty book-sized painting. But no, he painted a great big painting and they shrunk it down. And then they actually had to flip the image to get the typeface worked out. It's a very interesting process. I love being part of the whole process of the cover.
And that's something that a lot of writers don't have say in.
Yeah, and
So
I think that it's part that they don't have say. People say to me, "Oh, well, you know, you're Ann Patchett, you get whatever you want," which of course in life is true. I do get it, anything that I want. But I also think that it's taking responsibility to say to somebody, "This is how I imagine the book, and this is what I would like the book to look like." Your publisher will always have a much better chance doing a good job with the cover if you tell them what you want. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't bother because they wouldn't listen to me." Try it because
right.
it's a really hard thing to figure out. And in fact, I will say that I am out in California right now at my friend Suki Raphael's house, and she is a fantastic painter. And the painting that I have on the cover of the book that's coming out in November, one of Suki's paintings is on the cover, and one of her paintings is on the back. And
Oh,
that's
fantastic.
it's so thrilling. It's so beautiful. And then she was really a part of the conversation, which has been going on forever, of trying to figure out what the background color behind the paintings would be, and what the arrangement of the typeface would be. And so it's just kind of deeper and deeper into collaboration. I also think as a novelist, I don't have a ton of chances to collaborate. So kind of digging in with a friend on the cover and knowing that that friend's work is always going to be there has really been it's just thrilling, really thrilling.
Beautiful, beautiful. And this is okay, the lightning stops. This is a little bit of a loaded question because I'm leading the witness.
Okay.
You threw out the first draft for this novel.
Yeah.
So I don't want to drag you through what that was like. I witnessed some of it. It wasn't pretty.
In my house, when I
In your
came
house.
downstairs, Patrick often comes to my house in Nashville to write. And we have what we call writer's camp, which means we'll never have to go to Italy again. We can just be together in the house and write and have our meals together and talk about our work. So he was there when I finished the Dutch House, and then read it through, and then went downstairs. There's an apartment in the basement of our house where Patrick stays. And I was like, "Oh my God, I just wrote the worst book I've ever read, and I'm going to throw it out." And I did. So I
You
did.
did. You
Uh,
did.
and people said to me at the time, it must have been like a death. And I always said, "My God, it was like burning a cake." I mean, it was just like, "Oh, I really screwed up, and there's no saving it, and I'm gonna have to throw it out." And I threw it out, and nobody ever read it. People are like, "Well, what if you were wrong?" I was like, I own a bookstore. I read bad books all the time. This was one of them. I wasn't wrong. Um, and I was having this conversation with Elizabeth McCracken way after this book came out, and she said to me, "You know, that's called writing a first draft, right? Like everybody writes a book and throws it out, right? You're not special, you're not brave." And it really, it was so shocking, but it was shocking because of course she was absolutely right. It's just not the way I work. And I feel like I really figure things out as I go along. But I also thought the book was so much better for that experience. It really made me wonder, like, oh, well, what would it be like to always finish a book and throw it out and then start over again? Probably not great, right? Like, it's probably not a strategy.
No, it's not. I remember joking with you, Jim. It was a great time to make a joke where you said, "I'm going to throw this out," and I said, "Oh, it happens to me all the time. It's the easiest thing in the world." And I know that was not something that happens all the time. So speaking of just a few craft questions here,
Mm-hmm.
research. I just want to ask a quick question about research. So you started Bel Canto without an appreciation or an appreciation, but without a foundation of knowledge about opera. correct?
Yes and no. I mean, I did a lot of research about opera. Some of it before I started the book, but really it was ongoing. I honestly,
Yeah.
I didn't even know how to listen to opera when I decided to write a book about an opera singer. And the thing that was most important to me after many, many false starts was Fred Plotkin's book, Opera 101, which is just it's just such a great book. And every chapter there's an opera, and you read the notes, you read the liner notes, the libretto, not the liner notes. God, I've been in Nashville too long. And he teaches you how to listen and what the story is, and then you build on that, you build on that. So the whole time I was writing the book, I really was trying to learn about opera. I was flying up to New York and going to opera, listening to opera all the time, but I didn't know anything about opera in any kind of a deep way. And that I wrote that book 20 years ago. And what I know about opera now, it's just so much more. And it always cracks me up when the New York Times will call and say, will you write a piece, pick an aria by a soprano and write a piece about it? And I always want to say, do you have any idea what kind of a fraud I am? But at this point, I'm sorry, I shouldn't make you laugh while you're taking a sip of coffee.
No, it's water. It's water for that very reason. So if I spit,
Right,
it's all
okay,
gonna be fine.
Yeah, in fact, the Times did that recently. They had a whole list of people writing about their favorite soprano voice in their favorite aria. And I emailed Renee Fleming, who's a good friend of mine, and I said, will you do my homework for me? Will you tell me which, I'm going to pick you because you're my favorite soprano. You're my girlfriend soprano. And would you just pick the aria for me? And I swear it was like 10 minutes later, she emails me this whole file of links. There must have been 10 different arias of her singing. And I would just click and listen, click and listen, click and listen. And I got to Rachmaninoff's Vocalise, and I just burst into tears. And I was like, okay, that's the one. That's the one. I'll write about that one. But again, I'm completely cheating. I'm using the soprano. And then when the piece came out in the paper, there were maybe a dozen people writing about different arias. And Renee was one of them. And I called her up and I said, oh my God, I wouldn't have asked you to do my homework if I knew that it was your homework too. And she said, yeah, well, they asked you 3 weeks in advance and they asked me 3 hours in advance.
And it probably wasn't such homework for her. I mean,
Right. I think she typed it with one hand while she was playing the piano with the other hand.
Small world. I used to work at this giant corporate law firm, and Fred Plotkin used to work at that law firm, and he had written that book, I think, was his ticket out of working that job. And the department I worked in was filled with artists and actors and painters and writers, and I never met him, but he had left not too long, I think, before I got there.
He's the nicest guy, and he also writes cookbooks and does all of these tours, takes people to Italy for opera and cooking. And I have heard that there is a Patchett pasta, because I have sold more copies of Opera 101. I mean, I have been harping on this book for a solid 20 years, and it never gets old. And I mean to tell you, I read a lot of books about how to make friends with opera, and this was really the one.
And with State of, am I remembering right that you started the book before you actually went to the Amazon? Or
Oh, yeah.
I know that you went to the Amazon because of the book.
I did. In fact, I was probably halfway done with the book before I went to but you know what? It wasn't the Amazon. It was, I went to the Amazon when I wrote State of Wonder, but I went to Lima because the book is really set in Lima, and this is a great story. So it was set in the Japanese embassy in Lima. That's where the actual hostage crisis occurred, in the Japanese embassy, not in the home of the vice president. And I wanted to see it. And my husband and I, and he wasn't my husband at the time, we flew to Lima. We got in at 10 o'clock at night. We had gotten a car service to pick us up at the airport and take us to the hotel. And I said, I want to see the Japanese embassy. And he was like, oh, no, bad feelings, sad history. And it was a very recent event at that point. We don't like to take people by there. And I said, well, you know what, it's really important to me. I really do need to go by. And he was like, all right, we'll drive by 10 o'clock at night. So we're driving through Lima. It's obviously in a very nice residential neighborhood. There is a huge wall. And he says, it's been razed. The building's gone. There's just a wall and they're building a park there. And I said, oh yeah, I knew that, which of course I had no idea. And we drive past the wall. Like, we don't even slow down.
No.
And then we go to the hotel, and my husband looks at me and says, that's it. We flew to drive past a wall at 10 o'clock at night, and the house isn't there. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's how art works. That's how research works. So, I'm just making it as I go along.
Deduct the trip, that you can legitimately deduct the trip for driving past that wall.
That's exactly right. Although I think I did better than deduct the trip. I think I actually wrote a travel article about it. So I didn't deduct it because I didn't have to pay for it.
Okay, so the Patchett drawer. I don't even know if there is a Patchett drawer. Writers say that one's in the drawer. That's what's in the drawer. What's the drawing, where these things are that we got halfway through and didn't like, or now they're files on our computer, but that's always the phrase.
No, sure.
And I heard you say something really funny once, which is somebody asked you about if you ever thought about writing a sequel to any of your books. And I'm paraphrasing you, but you said, I am like a mother turtle. I lay the eggs and I walk away and I never, ever look back. And you don't reread them and you don't revisit them. That said, I just wonder, is there anything I have a feeling if there's a Patchett drawer, it's up here and not anything out there. And the reason I ask this is because I remember a long time ago having a conversation with you, and you said, I want to write a novel about God having two sons, and the two sons live on Earth. And then the next book was Run.
Right.
So
that is that book.
So that turned into Run, because it was a father and two sons. So there is not, so what is that, if that's not in the drawer, is there a project in the drawer that you've?
There's nothing in the drawer. The drawer is completely empty. I mean, the thing about Run is an interesting question, because that's very much the way my mind works. I'll have an idea that I would only tell to you. And then by the time I actually write the novel, it's changed so many times. Now there's a tiny little thread and I can walk it back and say, I remember I actually had a dream about God having two sons. That was the basis of that whole journey that didn't end up having anything to do with God. It had something to do with fatherhood and wanting your children to make the world a better place. But these things just kind of morph. And the trick for me is to know when to grab it in the process, like, it's almost like a fish, if it's too small, you got to throw it back and wait for it to grow up a little more. And that is that process. The only thing in the drawer right now is the book that I want to write, the book that is ahead of me. But there's nothing really lingering. And I'm always so interested when I ask people questions like that, when I'm interviewing people, and they'll say, well, I had this idea for a book 20 years ago. Actually, Colson Whitehead said that about Underground Railroad, that was a book that he had been kicking around for a long, long time. And it just stayed in the drawer. You know, he just kept thinking, now's not the time, now's not the time, I'm not ready. And that he was also working on like a noir detective novel when he read something that wound up being the inspiration for the Nickel Boys. So it's sometimes things get a little out of order, but I wish I was somebody who had a 20-year-old idea just lying around, because it would feel then very full and ripe and complete, maybe.
Well, I mean, maybe, yeah. Well, that's a nice version of the drawer, but I think the drawer is usually not a very pretty place. I had all of these manuscripts in my tiny little apartment here in Manhattan, and I literally had they only existed on hard copies because they were written on typewriters or, you know, on this floppy disk that didn't exist anymore, and I printed it. And I realized one day that when they were all stacked up, it was about the size of a child's coffin, and it was not an inspiring thought. So I scanned it all to PDF, but
Did you?
I never look at any of them. Like, I have them, and then I threw out the hard copies, but I never look at them. And whenever I talk to writers about what's a drawer, usually people have things in the drawer, but they don't intend to ever go back into the drawer. It's almost like an attic filled with the crazy relatives.
Yeah, I was talking to
don't really
Alan
wanna meet.
Ganis not too long ago, and he is putting his papers together to donate them to Duke. And you know, which is this ongoing process where he's mailing off boxes of papers. And he's like, I keep finding all of this wonderful stuff, like all of these novels that are 3/4 of the way finished. I just keep picturing Alan typing away at a novel and the phone rings, and then, you know, he's hungry, and then he forgets to go back and finish that novel and start something new. He said, you know, I hardly know which way to turn. There's so much good stuff.
Wow.
Around. And I thought, well, that's what it would be like to be Alan Gurganis's drawer. But no,
Yeah, that would be.
that's not the way
be,
it is at
maybe maybe he could donate his drawer to me and not
maybe.
to a school. I mean, I could really turn it into something.
Should we talk about the pandemic for a minute?
Yeah, that's my next. That was my next question, because I want to know.
I'll shut up. Go ahead.
No, please run the show. But I'm polling people I know, writers I know, for the last 6 or 8 months, and the most discouraging thing is that so many of my writer friends have said I haven't been able to write. A lot of them have said I haven't been able to read fiction, which is mind-blowing to me, because both those things helped get me through the last 12 months. Has your productivity changed? Has the last 12 months been more conducive to writing for you? Or
yeah,
disruptive?
I've gotten a lot done, and I wrote a book I had not expected to write at all. I wrote a collection of essays, which will be coming out in November. And I couldn't imagine writing fiction. Kind of from the get-go of the pandemic, I thought, oh, wow, I'm not going to be able to work because I'm not going to be able to write fiction. And then I started to write nonfiction. And nonfiction felt so good. It just felt like exactly where I needed to be, where I wanted to be. And I've loved it. It's like I hit the right thing at the right time. And I just got the page proofs for the book today. It's been copy edited. And I have this feeling of like, I don't know. I don't want to let it go. I want to be able to keep writing more essays and keep putting them in the book, because it's just been so right. That said, I have an idea for a novel, and once this book is completely off and corrected and ready to go, I will turn myself to that. And it has really been a very productive and peaceful time for me. This trip that I'm on right now is the first trip that I've taken in a year. It's the first time that I haven't like been in my own house for a year. I went to a restaurant last night in LA. It was the first time I have been in a restaurant in a year. And there's just been something about the consistency of my life and not going anywhere or thinking about going anywhere, that everything has calmed down and leveled. I feel just tremendously calm.
And do you think I mean, a lot of that is that you didn't do say a paperback, a traditional paperback tour for Dutch House. Do you think that the industry is going to set the needle back down on the way that we promote books when and if this sort of gets back to normal, or are we in the new normal in terms of how we promote
In
books?
the bookstore, and there are some events being booked for fall. I mean, there are book tours being planned for the fall. I'm not going. My book is coming out right before Thanksgiving, and I personally picked that date because nobody book tours after Thanksgiving. My book is coming out the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I was like, there is no way they can send me on a book tour if I publish a book the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. But the question for me is, will I do it in the future? And I've just started having people ask me to do things, and I've said no. I like Zoom, and I like the fact that so many more people can watch events. You can see your favorite writer, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what your proximity to a store is. I keep thinking about Glenn Gould saying he give concerts, he'd only do recordings because it was just more diplomatic, more democratic. And I really do feel that. Now, that said, I'm old, and I've really done my time on the road, and maybe the road is just a young woman's game. And I'm really, really glad that writers are still going to go out. It's such an important way to support bookstores and to meet people. I just feel like I've been doing it since I was 27. I've been doing it for 30 years, and maybe I don't need to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe maybe it's more valuable. Because I really do think, like, if you could have a choice between, you could go to a theater and see Ann Patchett live, or you could get another Ann Patchett book, and it's an either or. And when I say that, people are like, no, I want both. And I was like, well, okay, you've had both, but maybe I'm not doing it that way anymore. And everybody's different.
Yeah, well, yeah, I remember saying to you when we had a conversation, and I said, don't you miss going to the movies? And you said, I don't miss anything. I thought that was kind of funny. I've really enjoyed being able to see more authors and more events in the past 12 months. I mean, that has really been a boon. The store itself now, the store is doing really well, right? Parnassus.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe
coming out of last year.
Really well might be an overstatement, but we're good. I mean, my definition of really well is that we didn't lay anybody off. We paid everybody their salary, regardless of whether or not they felt comfortable working. There were people who just said, I don't feel comfortable. For the first several months, they didn't want to come into the store. We were closed, but they didn't even want to be around other employees. We were very sympathetic to that. We continued to pay them. We've paid everybody's health insurance. We've kept our 401k. That's really all that matters to me. And we pivoted. You know, we stayed very, very limber in the moment. We turned into a giant shipping operation. My sister Heather is in charge of shipping at Parnassus, and she became the person who was suddenly working 80, 90 hours a week. She stayed in the store until 5 o'clock one morning, putting labels on boxes. Everybody chipped in, and everybody was great. And especially my partner, Karen Hayes. But the joke that Heather just wanted kind of a quiet job. All right, I'll do shipping at Parnassus. And then it turned into a huge thing. I started doing Instagram videos for books, and in which I was holding up a book, you know, in my bag. Every week I hold up books and I say, this book is Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson. It's not out yet. You know, I love this book. I love this book. And I make these little 20-second videos where I'm snogging with a book. And it turns
Very
out that
popular.
they're very popular, right? I was voted by our local Nashville magazine as the breakout Instagram star of 2020. Okay.
Now that's pretty funny.
That's
That is,
amazing, considering that I've never seen Instagram before.
considering that you have a flip phone that you don't even use.
And
You
no
have
one,
a flip phone that lives in your glove compartment, right?
yeah, right. But I feel like, okay, if that's what I need to do, and I did most of the videos wearing ball gowns, if I need to put on lipstick and a fancy dress and cuddle with a book as a way of saying to people, here's a new book, here's a book that you're going to love, this is a book that I feel so passionately about, then I can do that. That's great. You know, it's not like I've just gone home and locked the door.
It's been really interesting, and I don't know if my take on the bigger picture of all this of indie stores is realistic, but before the pandemic, in Manhattan, and just for businesses in general, it was like eternal sunshine for the spotless mind. Things just gone, you know, empty, still empty. And you look around now and you think, oh, the pandemic really kicked this city in the ass. But this city was being kicked in the ass from, you know, stupid rent laws long before that. But it seemed to me that the people also rallied around their independent bookstores in ways. I know I've bought more books in the last year than I have bought in previous years by far. And it seemed like almost like all of the little boats going to Dunkirk to save the store, or, you know, it seems like people have rallied around the industry.
It's been so moving to me, because all this time I'm like, hey, you know, this is what we have that Amazon doesn't have. We have shop dogs and a smart staff and story time and author events and a community center and jazz workshop, and, you know, come to the bookstore and pay full price for your book and we'll give you the warm embrace and make you part of this community. And that's what we were.
Hello.
Louis?
All of that stopped.
Wait, I think Louis.
Yes, I think Patrick, I think we ought to leave a little time for Q&A.
Yeah, let's do
audience
that.
has submitted a bunch of questions, and this, I hate to interrupt a fascinating discussion, but we only have a certain amount of time left.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Can you take a few questions now?
Absolutely. If not now, when?
Okay.
Hi.
Now.
Hello. I'll be hosting the Q&A. So we have 8 questions so far. Audience, please feel free to keep submitting questions. So the first question is from Jenny Ash. Thank you. A question about the Dutch house. It felt to me as strongly or more so Maeve's story as it is Danny's. I am wondering how you chose to tell the story through Danny. Did you ever consider telling the story in both of their voices rather than only Danny's? And if so, why did you choose not to?
Because when you're working in first person, which was one of the things I wanted to do with this book, as I said at the beginning, the first thing you have to ask yourself is this the kind of person who would tell his or her own story? Maeve, definitely not the kind of person who would tell her story. She's super private. And I felt that seeing Maeve through Danny's eyes told us a lot about both of the characters. I never thought about writing it from Maeve's perspective because it's about Maeve. So I just wanted to look at her.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Tara Lindis. And what is your schedule like? Or rather, how do you work your time between writing and the bookstore?
I don't work at the bookstore. As I like to say, I am the benevolent overlord. I just kind of swan in and swan out and do my thing. I go there quite often, but I don't work the cash register. I'm not on the schedule. And when I'm really writing, everybody at the bookstore is very protective of me and supportive of me. So I can just say, hey guys, stop, stop asking me to do things. I'm not going to do things. And I go home and I write. I don't have a set schedule. Every day is reinvented, but certainly during this last year, when I'm not traveling and going out and giving talks and everything, my time is so much more consistent. I will also say that I'm a morning person in the extreme, and everything that I do in the morning is going to be what I do the best. Liz Gilbert talks in her book, Big Magic, about finding what your best time of the day is. She said everybody knows the 2 hours in which they are their best selves. And she was like, don't ever check email during those 2 hours. Don't ever return a phone call. Like, figure out what your best time is and then really be true to yourself in that time, which I would do, were not for the fact that it conflicts with my dog's need to go out for a walk.
Nice. This next question is from Anonymous. Does Anne own the mauve painting?
Oh yeah, yeah. The painting of Maeve. Yes, it's in my den. If I was in Nashville right now, I would pick my computer up and walk it over and show it to you. It's really, really beautiful.
The next question is from Anna Pierre de Luca. I love everything you've written, fiction, nonfiction, children's books, and you are the reason I subscribe to Harper's. How do you arrive? How do you arrive at your story ideas?
I don't know. I wish I did. I mean, for essays, it seems easier. Something will happen and I just think, oh my gosh, this is an essay. A kid called me on my birthday to say that his mother had bought a nightstand and he had taken the drawers out to clean it. She bought it at an auction, at an estate sale. And it turns out that it was my bedside table when I was in high school, and poems and letters that I had written in high school had fallen behind the drawer because I used to cram everything into the drawers of my bedside table. But then it became my grandmother's bedside table, and then she went to assisted living, and then the dementia unit. And then when she died, I was 41, and we didn't take her furniture. We just walked away and left the bed and the 2 night tables. It then, 17 years later, finds its way to an estate sale in Wartrace, Tennessee, and there's the paperwork. And this kid hunts me down to give me back the papers of, when I was 16 years old. That's an essay. Boy, howdy. That's just like God handing you an essay on a platter. So sometimes it's really, really easy. Sometimes somebody says something. Oh, gosh, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and it turns out that it was such a story. It was such a story concerning a Russian prostitute. And I kept thinking, people usually don't just tell me things that I think, I'm going to put the phone down and go write this novel right now. But the world is full of fascinating things. It's a willingness to be fascinated by the world, be profoundly interested in other people and in your own life. See the magic everywhere.
Absolutely right. Okay, that question is done. The next question is from Ann Duddy. Was your second draft completely different, or basically the same plot, but with writing more in line with your standards?
No, it wasn't the writing wasn't the problem. The plot was the problem. So it was the same people, and it was the same house, and it was the same sort of general idea. But like on page 30, in the first draft, I went right, and in the second draft, I went left. So it was a shift in the curveball that I threw these people to deal with, but they were the same people. It wasn't that the writing was bad, it was that the story was completely unbelievable. And if you're thinking, what could have happened? What could have been so bad? I will say, without ruining it for people who haven't read the book, that 150 pages of the original draft took place in Calcutta.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so bad.
All right. Next question is from Sharon K. She wants to know, was that villa the idea for Bel Canto?
Oh, no, it wasn't. And that's a really good question because I had just finished Bel Canto when I got to that villa. So I had my editor's notes. I arrived with a printed out manuscript of my editor's notes, but I had just finished it. And I spent the whole time I was there walking around going, well, it would have been really helpful if I had come to this villa while I was still writing this stupid book. Because it was amazingly that experience of the villa.
That was how I read Bel Canto, is because you finished working on those pages and you said, do you want to read this? And you handed me that manuscript. And I said, and I took it back in my suitcase with me.
That's right. Patrick had the original manuscript that my editor read and marked on because I gave it to him in the villa. That things like that happen all the time, that I finish a book and then I find myself in exactly the place that I needed to be while I was writing the book, and would think, wow, wouldn't it have been great if I had known that this was coming?
The next question is from Will Allison. Will and Deborah want to know, what exactly made the first version of the Dutch house so awful?
150 pages set in Calcutta. I didn't need to say it twice, but I said it twice.
All right. From Karen Gallagher, diabetes is a recurring theme. Why?
Because my best friend from childhood, Tavia Cathcart, is a type 1 diabetic. And I just grew up with her diabetes, and I love her so much, and we're so close. And it's always been something that I've thought a lot about. And it's also great when you have a friend that you can turn to and say, okay, in this scene, what would happen? And I have gotten so many wonderful letters from people saying, I'm so glad to see a type 1 diabetic so accurately portrayed in a book. And I always write back and say, that's because of Tavia. But I also want to say that when I was on book tour for Run, a woman came up to me one night in a signing line and she said, I'd like to read a book in which there was a character who was deaf, and it wasn't a book about being deaf. And I said, oh, that's a really good idea. And so in State of Wonder, I have a character named Easter who's deaf, and it is not a book about being deaf in any way. And that felt really good. And I had, again, a lot of mail from people who said, oh, I'm so glad there's just like this deaf kid in the book, and it's nobody cares, he's just deaf. And so I took that forward to the Dutch house, thinking about writing about diabetes, saying, yeah, this person has this condition and it's really challenging, but it doesn't rule her life, and it's not what she's thinking about all the time, because that's true of everybody I know who's diabetic.
Thank you for that. The next question is from Rachel Evans. I just read your piece in the New Yorker about throwing things out in your house, and I loved it. Can you share a story about something else besides the typewriter that you agonized over?
Oh, the agony was kind of on a curve of time. So the stuff that I got rid of at the beginning, the beautiful glasses and the dishware and that felt really hard when it was leaving the house, the silver. And what I found is every single thing that I felt bad about getting rid of, I would wake up the next morning and think, oh my God, I'm so glad it's gone. Oh, I'll tell you what, though. I didn't go through the books until after that piece was published. And I don't exactly remember what started me. Oh, it was my friend Kate. My friend Kate told me that she had cleaned out her books, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it today. And then that night, after I had pulled the first round of books in my library to get rid of, I went to bed. I was so depressed. I just thought, I have all these books with wonderful, loving notes in them from people that I haven't seen in 30 years. And I didn't particularly like the book. And I've been carrying it from place to place all these years. And I'm never going to read the book again. And I just felt and depressed and racked about the whole thing. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, bye-bye books. Like, okay, I mourned you. I'm really glad you're leaving now. And I feel now like I could go through my books once a week and cut them by half, and that it is a really good idea. And man, I get 5 books a week easily. I mean, 10 books a week sent to my house, and I am hyper vigilant about keeping them moving. But it really was those books, you know, people send me signed books. Oh, I love you. This is my first novel. And, you know, and I read it and it's signed to me and I stick it in the shelf, and no, not anymore.
Self-control. The next, oh, this isn't a question. It's also from Ann Duddy. She just says that your essay about Suki in Harper's was sublime.
Thank you very much. I'm at Suki's house right now. Okay.
And then this one is from Anonymous. Thank you for the Dutch house. Are you living your best life? What's next? Hollywood?
See, LA.
See, I am absolutely living my best life. And this year has made me think so much about that for so many different reasons, including just COVID and all of the terrible losses that people have suffered. And we're going to die, folks. And this is what we have right now. This is it today. And to stay constantly awake to that. I was talking to, again, my friend Kate the other day. Oh, it was Easter. And she said, okay, it's Easter. We were on the phone. She said, how about God? What, you know, how are you feeling about God? What do you think about God these days? And I was petting my dog on the couch. And I said, you know, yeah, absolutely. God is the dog and God is the tree out my window. And God is every single living thing. And the trick of this life is to keep your eyes open and to be amazed. And the fact that I've been home and quiet and still has allowed me to be amazed by life. And its brevity and its preciousness. And it's incredible. And that's why I don't want to go back to that life, because I feel like we get busy so we can forget about suffering and death and, you know, all of the things that are coming. But if we can just say, this is it, look, tulips. Come on. It's beautiful.
I think this is going to be our last question since it's nearing 7. This is from Dan Magida. Most writers rooted in a place like Nashville explore that place in detail, but I've always been amazed by that your novels are set all over the world: Peru, the Amazon, Cambridge, Memphis. Does this seem like a paradox to you?
No, it doesn't. You know, I've never had any real talent for writing about things that are too close. It's being myopic in a way. You know, if something is really, really close, I can't see it. And I'm much better at seeing things that are at more of a distance. My friend Kevin Wilson, who's such a wonderful, wonderful writer, writes the best books about Nashville. And I just always think, oh, you know, read Nothing to See Here. Read all of Kevin Wilson's books if you want to get a good look at what Nashville looks like. But I don't know, you know, maybe that'll be one more thing that I think, I never thought I'd write a book about Nashville, and now I have. But here's the other thing. Everybody in Nashville reads my books, But if I set a book in Detroit, then people in Detroit will read my books.
Smart. All right. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lewis to close out the program. Lewis, if you could unmute yourself and then turn on your video.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We'd like to see you as well. So
Can you hear
there
me?
you go. Perfect.
Hi, Lewis.
There I am. In any event, I'd like to thank Ann and Patrick for the very interesting discussion. I would have ended it on your thoughts about God being everywhere, but this was a wonderful evening. I hope the audience will join us in May for Maza Mengist and in June for Barbara Taylor Bradford. So thank you all for coming in, and thank you, Ann and Patrick.
Thank you for having us, Lewis. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ann. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Am I still